Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. And we have quite a full room with us today. So I'm Helen Fulton, the leader of the Mapping March project, and it's very nice of you to join us today for this seminar. I hope you can stay for the papers that you really want to hear. So this project has been funded, this seminar, I should say, has been funded by Mapping the March, because part of the point of the project is to think about cultural and national identities. And it tied in very well with our guest speaker, David Wallace's current project on national epics. And the speakers here today, myself, David, Geraint Evans, and Kate McClune, are all contributing to David's 2-volume work on national epics. So today we're exploring the idea of nation, the idea of epic, and whether we can talk about national epics in terms of the 4 nations of the United Kingdom. So how can we talk about nationalism in terms of sub-state nations, nations which aren't a nation state, in fact? So these are some of the ideas that we're going to be exploring. So thanks very much for coming today. It's very good to see you, and we should have some interesting discussions, I think. So I'm going to invite David Wallace to come up first and talk about the National Epics Project. Many of you will know David. He is the Judith Rodin Professor of English at the University of Pennsylvania. He's published incredibly widely in medieval literatures, both English and European. He's published on Chaucer, published on Italian literature, and a few years ago he was the editor of another huge 2-volume work called Europe, A Literary History, 1348-1418, which was an incredibly useful work that many of us still refer to. So it's a great pleasure to have David with us today. So David is going to introduce the project on national epics. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. Great pleasure to be here. Many of you know I've made many visits to Bristol before, so you know the evolutionary stages of this project. So this is like the next segment of it. And I've got 15 minutes just to give a kind of overview of the National Epics Project. Helen referred to the earlier project, which was a literary history of Europe. This is the website, which is now degraded. And you can see, slightly obscured on the right-hand side, that there's a series of itineraries. And so it's all about movement and the crossing of national boundaries. That's what it's really about, a kind of trans-European movement and a redefinition of the movement. I think I can minimize this, can't I? Is that all right? Yeah. Okay. So that was the earlier project, all about the crossing of national boundaries. And you may remember how fashionable the term global was, global Middle Ages, global everything, about 5 years ago. But so this was the outcome, the 2 volumes that Helen referred to. And we did sort of expand the parameters, the boundaries of Europe, with the understanding that you can't really understand a territory without reference to that which lies beyond it. So there's a lot of chapters on North Africa, various other areas. And then it was published in June 2016, quickly followed by Brexit. So it's like a catastrophe. And if you read the original introduction, it's full of the sunlit uplands of enthusiasm and optimism about international European collaboration. So from that point on, I began to think, well, actually, what's actually happening in the world is not so much transnationalism and globalism. It is an intensifying nationalism and deglobalization. It's paradoxical because in some ways the world is still globalizing, but in other ways it's also deglobalizing. So I began to think about nationalism as an object of study, which I do in my teaching. And I think my teaching's been key to my evolution of my thinking here. This is the course I'm currently teaching. It's called National Epics, and we do 1 nation per week. We start in Western Europe, we go across Eurasia, and then we end up in Asia proper. So this is what we've gone through so far. And every week we say, well, what national epic was chosen for a particular nation? In the case of France, the Song of Roland. When was that choice made? How was it enforced? In France, it was made compulsory study for every child in every French school and every school in every département across the world. And how is that decision holding up? Well, nowadays, the Song of Roland is a bit difficult to teach in certain parts of Paris, given the kind of anti-Muslim emphasis. So that's the kind of exploration that's gone on with every one of these. The same with the Cid has become very problematic in Spain. So now come Russia, Mongolia, China, and now we have spring breaks. This is exactly where we are. And then we these other powers are very much under the shadow of China that will do Korea, Vietnam, even the Philippines, and then India. So that's how it sort of developed the thinking. Also, pondering nationalism, it's been very instructive to go to the Biennale in Venice and see how they do nationalism. And as you'll know, that European nations began by building these permanent pavilions for themselves in the early 20th century. Here's Denmark. And what I broadly have found is that the European nations are extremely embarrassed and consternated about their own national identity. So here's Denmark with the kind of classical columns, and you walk into it, and what do you find? Really, really beautiful figures, but a centaur hanging from the ceiling by his neck and another dead centaur there. This is not untypical of the way Europeans consternate about it. Some European nations are joyous in their relationship to their literature. For Iceland, for example, it was really their means to achieving culturally independence from Denmark, and the foundation of their national editions was based on that. But the really joyful expression of nationalism or nationality is found in newer nations. This is Ghana, for example. The Museum as Freedom. It's sort of like, oh, finally we do get to experience and think about our own national identity. And there's a real crisis, I think, curricular, actually, in the very term post-colonial. There are not many more positions in America for post-colonial literature, because that always still defines a nation by reference to its former colonial status. There's much more interest, I would say, in a kind of global Englishness or global anything that's not always defined in relationship to colonial power. So you can see here some rather joyful expressions. And I'm getting very interested in nationality as a positive and enjoyable concept. There are some very clever ways of finessing national identity, such as the American is unmistakably a massive brick structure, the American Pavilion at Venice. But Simone Leigh very cleverly thatched it, being African American. She simply thatched the building, gave it a softer profile, and redefined what it means to be American. And our USA chapter in National Epics is written by an African Americanist. Simone Leigh I think about every day, because recently they installed this beautiful sculpture on the edge of our campus at Penn. So this was the challenge given to the contributors. I guess it's worth reading. Each chapter brings challenges peculiar to itself. For this reason, no editorial template is offered as to how a chapter should be structured. So this goes to each of the people recruited to write. Each chapter will assess shifts over time that determine what a representative text and national epic needs to be. How might a nation recognize itself, and for how long in a given text, considering the evidence of classroom instruction, which is crucial, readership and cultural remediation into drama, film and art. Who is included, who excluded by such national interpolation? Does your nation in question achieve recognition by aggregating smaller regional units, as often in 19th century Europe, or by breaking off from larger imperial structures, as often later globally? How might the representational culture of a new nation, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Romania, constitute itself? And then the term epic requires a bit of glossing. The key term epic invokes literary form while carrying Western baggage. Epic in this project functions as a term of art, standing in for many other terms in other languages. Forms of epicity may vary widely according to region and the timing of national emergence. National epics are not discovered as such, but are rather adopted, groomed, and cultivated. Some national imaginaries, as in the Caribbean and Latin America, are taking shape long before there's independent nation state to accommodate them. This is the current state of the project. Well, not quite current, because a few more nations have actually been added. This is a publicly accessible website, nationalepics.com. And if you click on any coloured in nation, you get a 300-word summary and an image of what the author, at the time they submitted the abstract, thought they were going to do. Of course, that can sometimes change. There's a challenge to how you accommodate smaller nations, such as Caribbean nations. We actually got some little pins now that make certain of our Caribbean nations visible, like Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago. I've had one good editorial idea in the course of the project. Initially, I was going to write a big general introduction, 10,000 words, and then we have the chapters. But then I thought, well, if we do that, it's like, here's a prescription, 10,000 words. How well has each nation lived up to it? So I've now decided to go very, very much smaller, with the initial offer to my contributors, and then a much longer afterward, where I'll discuss or try and synthesize what it is collectively our authors have come up with, because I have no idea what they're going to come up with. That's the excitement of it. That would be the point, I think, of a contributor doing it. It's not like they're following a prescription that they just have to colour in, but they are inventing all the terms for themselves from first principles, which is why I think it's enjoyable to be part of. There have been resistances to traditional ideas of epic text, most famously by Marina Abramovich, who had a big show, a rather alarming show in London quite recently. And here you see on a sort of passive horse with a flag flowing. And she relates this to a relationship to her father, who was involved in Balkan wars. There's a kind of resistance there. There are interesting feminist aspects to resisting traditional ideas of what a national epic might be, which she then turned into a moving screen on Times Square. Another one is by Ursula Le Guin, who wrote a brief essay called The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction. Again, she says, what if we stopped telling stories about heroes killing other living beings, which a lot of epics are rather about that. That's the carrier bag theory of fiction. Before we were ever hunters, we were gatherers. While gathering, you need a leaf, a gourd, a shell, a net, a bag, a container. So this is read by most of my students, I should say, are not English majors. The beauty of teaching in America is that you can offer a course that's taken by students from all over. Many of them are from the Wharton School of Business or International Relations or something like that, which adds a lot of perspective. One of them observed, well, actually, if you think about it, if you wander into a new area with your carrier bag and fill it up with stuff and carry it away, you may well be expropriating other people's stuff, other people's territory. So there's a very nice critique of this particular theory. And things constantly evolve, and so opening ceremonies of Olympics are always a wonderful time to sort of reflect on this. And the authors writing the Algeria chapter noticed what happened in July 2024, when the Algerian delegation is going down the Seine and realized that they were going through the site of a previous massacre of Algerians in Paris. And here's a picture of that happening. They started reacting to it. This is by Walid Bouchakour and Jill Jarvis. So many bodies were thrown by the police into the river in October 1961. In a video posted in the Algerian Olympic Committee's Facebook page, one of the delegates speaks directly to the camera to explain what he and others are about to do. And so they enter these cries, long live Algeria. And 11 million viewers see this within a few days. And they also write about the commissioning in Algeria of, in a newly enfranchised nation, they would need a national epic, Iliadat al-Jazir, or Algeria's Iliad. They're commissioned to do it by central authority. Modeled as a Homerian epic, first recited in the 6th Islamic Thought Seminar in Algiers in 1972. And they do a thorough critique of this particular national epic, again, about who it includes and who it does not manage to accommodate, like the Tuareg are looking at it from the outside. And there have been other examples, as in Kenya and South Africa, of national epics recently commissioned. Just a few examples. Nessa Cronin is writing our Ireland chapter. She can't be with us today, unfortunately. She otherwise engaged. But this, I mean, every author means I engage with a wonderful conversation about this is her choice for Ireland is the Táin, and she connects it to a sewing project that's been going on. And I had my conversation with Nessa is, well, what about James Joyce? Does he merit a mention? And she says, no. No, he's not the national poet of Ireland. He left Ireland and wrote in English. So it's a very hardcore kind of relationship. But again, it's always the discussion that's really fascinating. And here we have Scotland, which we hear about from Kate. And we have Wales. So that's it for an introduction. So yeah,
Great,
to hand
thank
over.
you.
Thank you.